to all. Hello and welcome to the Daily Finance Wrap, your daily dose of personal finance updates covering investments, insurance, loans, real estate, everything to do with your personal. We are going to be talking about how we're going to get to discussing all the big top stories that will cover the universe of the finance markets and all of that. And of course we'll get experts also to be give us their analysis. But today is going to be interesting because if you are someone who's planning to buy a new car in 2025, then this episode is going to come to your rescue. That's because we're going to try to break down the key factors that you will need to consider before buying a new car. Now, what are the different variants that are there out there? What kind of body types are available? How do you compare the features from what one company is offering versus the other? Do you need an automatic or a manual, an EV or a fuel? There are so many aspects that comes to when you're actually going down to decide whether which car you're going to buy. And of course, they say a car is pretty much an extension of your personality. So that thought and that kind of deep digging into what really fits you is going to be important. So we're going to try and get some of those answers for you with our experts. But before that, let me take you through a couple of top stories of the day. If you look at the Indian equity markets, well, they didn't pay much heed to what the RBI are going on to maintain its status quo, but we did witness quite a volatile session to finally end lower for the week. We saw the Sensex was down by about 56 odd points, but still holding on to that 81,700 levels, whereas the Nifty too slipped below that 24,700 levels that it had managed to conquer. Now, we did see on the sectoral front, except for IT as well as media, all the other sectors were quite there in the green and positive, be it from the auto names or metal, FMCG, all of them were quite positive. The likes of a Bajaj Auto, Axis Bank, SBI Life, Tata Motors, Maruti, those were among your top gainers in trade today. Whereas on the flip side, we did see Adani Ports, Bharti Airtel, HDFC Life, which saw some bit of pressure, and those were your laggards in trade. So the markets are snapping that 5-day gaining streak, but on a weekly basis, still managing to hold on to the green, could say. Now, moving on to that big policy decision that came out today, well, it was quite a status quo, one would say, with the RBI actually deciding to maintain that policy repo rate at 6.5%, and this for the 11th consecutive time, leaving that standard deposit facility as well as the marginal standing facility rates steady as to what they were for the previous sessions. Right up until May of 2023 is when the last rate change came, and now they're continuing with that. However, what the RBI has gone on to announce is a 50 basis point reduction in the cash reserve ratio at about 4% now, which was earlier 4.5%. Now, this means that there's going to be more liquidity injected into the banking system. So close to 1.16 lakh crore rupees is what this whole, the 50 basis points could bring in additional liquidity to the banks. And that is going to be quite a plus side, especially for most of your banking names. What the other decision that came out from this whole bi-monthly policy meeting was the fact that the RBI has now taken note of the slowing growth. So they've gone on to revise their growth forecast. So the GDP forecast for FY25 is revised downward to 6.6%. And remember, it was earlier 7.2% was what was projected. So that's going to be quite a harsh revision, and that's what we saw in the Q2 GDP number as well at 5.4%, and which is why now overall FY25 they are pegging it at 6.6%. Even more is they've also changed the forecast for inflation. So now the inflation forecast has been raised for FY25 to 4.8% from the 4.5% that it was earlier. So it is going to be interesting, but in terms of that rate cut that we were expecting, they've still not bent there, and that one is maintained at status quo. Let's also look at other market stories, and we did have Suraksha Diagnostics. That one made quite a flat debut today on the Lal Street. It listed at about 438 rupees on the NSE, which was just about a 0.68% discount, in fact, from its issue price of 441 rupees, what was pegged. And remember, this was supposed to be an 846 crore offer for sale, which was fully subscribed as well, but didn't see much takers today on listing day. In fact, analysts had noted that the company's inconsistent financial performance and had then advised that maybe the valuations are quite high compared to its peers, and which is why it did not see that kind of listing gains. But the market capitalization after listing stands at somewhere around 2,281 crore following the listing. So that's one that you can look out for, Suraksha Diagnostic, the new kid on the block, we could say. But talking about the primary markets is another interesting happening that has come about, and this from digital payment firm One MobiKwik Systems. Now, One MobiKwik has gone on to reduce its IPO size for the third time now, and now they have pegged it approximately at 572 crore rupees, with a price band which has been set at 265 to 279 rupees per share. Now, remember, the subscription will open on December 11 and close on December 13. And so far, the anchor bidding will take place a day prior, that is on December 10th. The company plans to utilize the proceeds for growth in their financial services business, as well as in technology developments, is what the RHP so far reads. Now, following a series of adjustments that we've seen in its IPO plan since January 2024, that's when it actually reached out to SEBI saying that they want to go ahead and list. There have been quite a few tweaks that have come in MobiKwik's at least valuations so far. It does aim to list, though, on December 18th. That's when we'll see it on the Lal Street, and they're targeting a market capitalization now of 2,165 crore rupees. And moving on then more to the market regulator now, where the regulator has proposed a revised settlement framework for inactive trading accounts. And this is so that they enhance operational efficiency while also protecting investors. Currently, what happens is the brokers must refund funds to the clients who haven't traded in 30 days, and this needs to happen within 3 working days. However, obviously this process does take so much time, but it can also crop up and lead up to inefficiencies, and which is what they're trying to bridge that gap. The new proposal suggests that the settlement, at least of funds, needs to happen during the monthly running account cycle instead. So that will give both the brokers also time, as well as those who haven't traded, or these inactive funds will now get that time within a month, or you'll have a specified time when you know that the funds are going to be refunded into your account. This, of course, will reduce that administrative burden, but also ensure timely refunds to people who haven't traded to their demat accounts. Well, those are some of the policy as well as markets and corporate stories that you need to be tracking for today. But let's move on then and get to the interesting part now. The new year is around the corner, and well, if buying a car is on your to-do list for 2025, then we've got you covered, because it might be tempting to go ahead and purchase a brand new automobile, but how will you know what is the right fit for you? That's something that we are going to try and answer with my guest who's joining me, Parth Charan. He's an auto journalist. He's going to help us decipher how to go about buying a new vehicle. Welcome to the show, Parth. Nice to be speaking with you.
Hi, Stacy. I'm not able to hear you.
Okay,
There's an audio issue. I've been trying to, I'm unable
is
to,
it better now?
not getting any
Are you able
audio
to
feedback.
are you able to hear me now? Is it better?
Hello.
Parth, are you able to hear me clearly now? Is it better? Okay, we'll try and fix that line with Parth. If you can hear me, or at
Hello.
least somehow get the audio. I'm able to hear you clearly. Parth, is my audio reachable? Are you able to decipher? Well, we'll try and get that conversation going with Parth, but like I was mentioning before, it is interesting to know it's not an easy decision, in fact, to make when you're sitting down to buy a new vehicle. There are quite a few of those that you need to be checking off your list to literally understand. What really will it take? Of course, there is the cost and the money side of things, but there is also, you need to see, once you do purchases, all the costs, that the cost of ownership. I think that is something that people often tend to take for granted, or rather say that, okay, now that you have a car, you probably haven't really thought of when it comes to the repair and services and how much that could cost you, or the fuel charges, if that is something that also could dent your pocket. So that is what we can speak about in detail. Parth, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I'm able to hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
super, no problem. So I was just talking about a lot of things that people tend to overlook when they're going ahead to buy a new vehicle are things like the repair and services charges, or the kind of fuel that you've chosen, because all of this at the end of the day are still adding to your ownership cost. So if somebody is to start off with saying, okay, I do wish to buy a vehicle, how do they start, or where is that starting point? Of course, it will be to set that budget right. So from there, how much are you willing to spend, and how should one go about deciding on that budget? So if there are some factors that you could list out of, this needs to be, you need to take all of this into consideration, then go ahead and go ahead and get that dream car.
Well, firstly, I think the good news is that there are a lot of options today for the car buyer. The kind of permutations that we have, even with mass market cars and entry-level vehicles, is better than ever. Uh, if you're going to buy if you're buying your first car, then one of the factors you should keep in mind, of course, is what kind of fuel you need. Now, in the hatchback segment, we've pretty much seen, diesel powertrains disappear. Uh, so you have to take into account, firstly, the fact that how much you drive every day, what your average driving distance is, what kind of environment you're driving in. Personally, I always feel like a smaller, more compact vehicle as a daily driver is always better. But of course, there are other aspirational factors that people want to take into account. And that's why you see the sort of compact SUV segment really thriving, because it gives
Yeah.
people that, right amount of practicality. Uh, with emission norms becoming more stringent, I think diesel cars are now not as preferable as they were once. There's also CNG, there are EVs, so there are a lot more options now. There are also, self-charging hybrids, which are kind of replacing diesel in the sub 20 lakh category. We're starting to see that. So I think, like any other thing, you have to take into account, firstly, how many kilometers you're going to drive. In most cases, diesel is almost ruled out because of
Yeah.
poor resale value. You have to, if it's an EV, you have to kind of see what your domestic charging situation is. With CNG, you have to take into account the fact that there aren't enough CNG stations, and if you're going interstate or across cities, then there are going to be some performance limitations when it comes to CNG. So in terms of powertrain, I think those are the factors that you need to keep in mind. Then, of course, comes reliability, service costs, etc., which is, it's a totally different um, sort of metric to look into.
Right. So those are at least the bare basics that you've decided to get a car. You will look at these, a few, couple of them, whether you're going to get into the EV space and you're going to have to take those personal decisions. But are there any key features that one needs to absolutely have in the car? Like, you need to be making sure that you have a certain kind of engine, or the gearbox is a particular way. Now, not too many people might have the technical knowledge, and it could get confusing, especially if you're just speaking to the salesman in the dealership.
Right.
So is there a list, or a simplified way of must haves that you need to be at least looking at when you go and speak to the salesperson there?
Sure. So I think people, firstly, when it comes to, let's say, an automatic, there are a lot of options. If you're in the very budget end of the segment, then you go for what are called AMTs, which are automated manual transmissions. Now, earlier there was this notion that automatics are not as frugal and fuel efficient, and they're much more expensive to maintain. But now there are versions of automatic, gearboxes, like, for example, up just above the AMT, which is the most bare bones, basic, very sluggish. It has its own issues, but in terms of maintenance and fuel economy, it'll give you what you need in that entry level hatchback. Then you kind of come to CVT gearboxes, which is continuous variable transmission. Uh, we find that in cars like the Honda City. It's present in a lot of other sort of, mid-segment cars as well, because it gives you that fuel economy that you need. It's a bit more responsive than an AMT, and at the same time, it's much cheaper to maintain. So now that fuel efficiency compromise is no longer that much of a factor. So you can, I think, the preference for automatics has gone up considerably, particularly in tier one cities where the traffic is particularly bad. In addition to that, I think now people are far more safety conscious. So they are looking at not only the crash safety rating, if your own car has not undergone a global NCAP rating. We have our own safety
Yeah.
rating system, Bharat NCAP, but there are very limited number of cars that have undergone that test so far. So you may not be able to, ascertain the crash safety rating of your own car, but people are looking at uh, just the overall safety rating history of the brand. In addition to that, I think a lot of brands, Maruti Suzuki, Hyundai, etc., are going forward, meeting the government halfway by offering 6 airbags as standard. Even though this is not a legal requirement, they are doing that. So uh, you have to kind of check that. You have to make sure the ISOFIX mounts are there. Seatbelt reminders. I mean, ideally, everyone should not need a reminder. But these kind of enhance the safety rating of a vehicle. Ideally, 4 airbags is a must, but a lot of options are now coming with 6 as standard at not too much of a premium. You're only paying about 20-30K extra, which is well
Right. In
worth
fact, I
the
was just
cost.
going to ask you to give us, if somebody does want, make sure that they have those 6 airbags. I think most of our Indian cars are known to have those poor safety ratings. So, how important it is that, you need to have that check. And also, if you do want something extra or you want the company to add it for you, how much does it make a difference in the cost overall? Or, how much more is the addition going to cost you?
So luckily, I think when it comes to things like airbags, the additional cost is not there's not that much of a premium. You have to pay maybe 25 to 30K extra, even if it's been standardized. So, for example, the Maruti Suzuki Desire, which had thus far had a very terrible crash safety record, has just got a 5-star rating from Global NCAP. And that's part of the reason is because it has 6 airbags. Now, the overall cost has only gone up by 20,000 compared to the previous model. And these are all base level models which are tested. So the premium is really not that considerable. I think the other things where it does get a little costly are infotainment features, but Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, these have become fairly standard the things because we don't really go base our travel on the sort of native sat nav app of the car, which may or may not be particularly good. So those are the things. I think a lot of brands, especially mass market ones like Hyundai, Kia, Maruti Suzuki, they do offer a lot of features, heads up display, ventilated seats, etc., which do make your overall, journey a lot better. So in terms of features also, there are a lot of options. You have to kind of decide which one enhances your safety, makes the driving aspect more comfortable for you. If you want blind spot monitors, if you want sensors, what kind of, if you want a 360-degree parking camera, etc. Those can add to the costs, but not considerably.
Right. Well, let's look at, in India, we tend to have that bigger is better kind of mindset. And hence, we've seen how the SUV segment, at least, has been most of your new launches are coming within that space. How can one decide what is the right body type or also, the price? Because I think today and such a time, the price ranges are often overlapping. So, what should be the factor that should tell you that, okay, yes, of course, the number of people and who you want to be, transporting in that vehicle will be one factor. But with so many SUVs that are coming in, pretty much your entry level or the other hatchbacks will not really have a chance. So, how does one decide which would be a right fit?
Well, with the compact SUV segment, in terms of seating, it's primarily five-seaters. Um, I do get inquiries for people who have, elderly members in the family, or they want a third row for their children. Uh, in which case, the options, there are now more options, uh, for example, you'll either be in the MPV category on the budget end, where you have something like the Ertiga. You have to know that in all these categories, the third row isn't particularly spacious. So you're better off utilizing that boot space, which again you only really need if you want to, do interstate trips. Now, our highway network has really, really improved in the last few years. So people are driving across states, they're driving across the country a lot more. And in that sense, they are able to utilize the additional space. I think across segments, the third row is generally, not the most practical. If you, unless you have small children and, they'll outgrow it fairly soon. Um, so that continues to remain a factor. I think for most people, it is about the ground clearance, it's about the visibility, and then there are other factors that come into play in terms of how sort of imposing the car's appearance is, etc. I think it's largely to do with the comfort we get out of driving at a higher driving position. uh,
Mhm.
there is a lot of similarity across in terms of space. This is a very, very competitive segment.
Yeah.
So in terms of headroom, legroom, etc., it's not going to be too different if you go for a Creta versus a Grand Vitara. So it's really a brand preference. It's about service. It's about whether you're looking for economy in particular, you want a little bit of performance, or you want a dual clutch gearbox. But in terms of space and utility, the compact
Yeah.
SUV segment more or less offers the same. And then they
Yeah.
have derivatives which have a third row in case you want that. But in my experience, that's not known. It's not really particularly comfortable for long journeys anyway.
Right. So that also narrows things down for us, because you have so many choices available. I think that by deciding where this travel is going to be or what it's going to be used for, I think that can also narrow down whether the body type, or whether you need an SUV or a sedan, and that can also be a deciding factor. What
Yeah, I think
about
sedans are now, more or less outgoing as a trend. You don't see too many. In fact, that segment is really not doing particularly well. I think Volkswagen is among the few who are sort of flying that
yeah,
flag, but uh, other brands are kind of sort of going out. If you were to see the Thar rocks, when it was launched, the kind of demand that it saw,
right.
clearly there is. Something about the SUV shape and form factor that
Mhm.
resonates with people, that comforts them, that makes it. Uh, I think it ticks a lot of boxes for people, and sedans are now seen as uh, impractical. And what happens over time is that if the average driving height over the years has become higher, your
Yeah.
tendency to prefer a lower one aren't going to be that high, because now on an average people are driving at a certain height. So when once that becomes a prevalent norm, you kind of feel conspicuous sitting in a sedan, sitting at a much lower
Yeah.
height on the highway, on flyovers, etc. So that also sort of takes care of it and kind of pushes that segment out eventually.
Right. Speaking of future and demand, well, future is electric, is at least where most of what we're getting to hear. We just saw two new launches from Mahindra as well. And, of course, the Tatas had quite a dominance there, at least when you're talking about the electric vehicles here. But there is good enough competition also now that has come up. How does one narrow down this choice, and, what should be on their list when deciding between the fuel type and electric, if at all, and what are the different things they need to know while making this choice? Because an electric one will have a whole different kind of vehicle altogether, and also when you're looking at fuel types, then which one and how should one be deciding?
Well, it's interesting, that you say that because there is this notion that yes, there are more EVs, and 2025 in particular, will be a sort of breakthrough year in terms of EVs because Hyundai, Maruti Suzuki, they're going to bring these homegrown EVs, and a lot of people are very particularly loyal to these brands. So Maruti Suzuki customer, a long time customer, is not likely to go with a Mahindra or something. However, I think we need to take into account that EV market penetration is still very, very low. All these brands which have offered them do it because they need to now have EVs in their portfolio. You can't sit out of the EV space anymore. So for that reason, their portfolio needs to include certain EVs, unless you're Tata Motors, which is, wants to go predominantly in that EV direction. However, if you were to ask analysts at Deloitte, etc., who've done a lot of research, the immediate future is not going to be electric. We're not going to see that become anywhere close to mainstream, even till to post 2035, and that's because the charging network is still deeply problematic. We even as patchwork as it is right now, our public charging infrastructure is woefully inadequate. We have about, on an average, 25 to 30 kilowatt hour public charging stations,
Right.
which are a fraction in terms of the kilowatt hour requirement of a public charging station compared to the US or the UK. You need to have at least 80 to 100, or about 60 to 80, because you still need to put aside, let's say, a couple of hours if you're running on low battery on the highway. So
Hmm.
that rules out immediately, highway drivability, even though range for EVs has improved considerably. You
Yeah.
have you can eke out about 400 to 450 odd if you with careful driving. But nobody wants to go through that kind of anxiety. Secondly, residual value continues to be a major concern for EV owners because the first batch of owners are still sort of midway through their ownership cycle and they don't really know what the resale value of their cars will be. So yes,
Okay.
there will be some, now that you have these buyback offers, you have subscription plans, etc. They're really trying, but unless a very long-standing incentive plan comes in the form of Fame 3, I
Hmm.
don't think people are going to adopt to, switch to EVs at the rate they were expecting and the kind of buzz that EVs had created. I think primarily you need to have a proper domestic charging setup, by which I mean it shouldn't be a common domestic charger in the building, because now if you have, let's say, 4 or 5 EVs, each of which
Hmm.
require about 6 to 7 hours of charging, even if you're charging just about thrice a week, that's
Hmm.
still going to be a problem in an apartment complex. To say nothing of the fact that there are several apartment complexes who've not been able to figure out the electricity allocation aspects, so
Correct.
have just put a blanket ban on EV chargers altogether.
Hmm.
So I don't think we should get carried away by the news cycle and the amount of launches. I think the ground reality is still very different, especially for people who live in high-rise apartments and whatnot. Even if you
Right.
have a charging station dedicated to you at work, I would still say, until you have your own charging setup in your fixed parking spot, do not go for an EV,
EV.
as far
In
as
fact,
four-wheelers are
there
concerned.
there are a couple of queries coming in. Ashish wants to know, and since we're talking about EVs, whether there are still any subsidies or incentives that are available out there that the government is giving if you do go ahead to buy an EV. Could that actually lure more people?
So I think the PM E Yojana that is going to stay till about March has offered like an olive branch to e-scooter buyers. It's not very extensive. It's just you can get about 10K off the
Hmm.
ex showroom price. Nothing for cars at the moment. However, Fame 3 is up. This budget they should announce Fame 3, and I think everyone's kind of sitting and waiting to see what kind of incentives will be on offer because they're still kind of debating. You have one side, you have the hybrid lobby from Japan, which argues that that's the better solution overall, looking at India's electricity supply, the sheer number of cars that will need to be charged, all of
Hmm.
those factors. Uh, I don't think it'll be particularly long term. It's not going to be what China did, for example, which is incentivized it for a good decade,
Yeah.
and did it in such a way that people who were owning ICE cars were taxed extremely high. So it gave them no choice but to go make the domestic market an EV market. That's not something we are going to see here because we have too many combinations and permutations.
Right.
Um,
In fact, otherwise
so
we'll get to
yeah.
see Elon Musk and Tesla also, and that could be an option if at all the government does decide to go away
I
that.
think the government will offer some subsidies. Whether they will be very long term we'll have to see. It'll probably be for another 2 or 3 years, and that'll breathe some life. But again, I don't know if it's going to be sufficient enough to get people to switch over because even though there's price parity now, that's better than ever. The
Hmm.
subscription plans that you see now have really, really made it very price wise very attractive for people to buy EVs. But
Right.
but the infrastructural issues, those still stay. And another crucial aspect is a lot of these manufacturers are now offering buyback schemes. But the caveat is that they offer up to 60% after whatever years. So
Duration.
it remains to be seen what that up to mark will be. If these brands only give you, let's say, 30 or 40% and, have a bunch of excuses towards the end of that cycle, people might just lose faith in this buyback scheme plan altogether. So I think for the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to have to wait and watch how the space develops. We're going to see higher penetration in the luxury space, but not so much below that.
Right. Then we also quickly touch upon the whole fact of insurance and auto insurance. That is something that people often are confused. Like, is a comprehensive policy good enough? Do you need to get these add-ons? How should one be, also factoring the cost wise for it, because that is something that they'll need to do if you're going to have a vehicle out there on the road. So what all should your premium then include once you get an auto insurance? I think that is also important when we're talking about a new vehicle.
So I think, third party is mandated by law, but you should go for comprehensive insurance. Uh, the price, of course, varies from model to model, but in general, the additional costs that you will incur after purchase is registration, road tax, which varies from state to state. Now, with the EVs, there's some waiver in some states, in others, there isn't. Uh, and then, of course, you have I think comprehensive just offers more protection. Uh, I would also recommend going for extended warranty packages because, you know, it improves your resale if within a longer warranty frame you've got original parts, you've gone to authorized service centers, etc. So those, FASTag, number plate, all those are also, those are essentially, it's the insurance, road tax, RTO, FASTag, number plate, and
Right.
registration costs. Those are
Right.
essentially the additional ones. And sometimes when you at the dealer, they will throw in some accessories for free. Some they will insist that you go for just for ease of usage. If it's a more expensive car, you might want to get a PPF wrap that's normally reserved for sports cars and,
Hmm.
high depreciation, very, very expensive.
Right. Okay, I'm going to quickly get one last question. I think this is something that pretty much everyone thinks of, because come festive season and you're lured with different kind of discounts, and is that really a good time to be buying a car? Because people keep waiting, saying that okay, Dasera, Diwali now could be the right time, or is this just pretty much a marketing gimmick and you should wait for year ends when the dealerships want to finish off their stocks? So what, and also waiting periods, because nowadays is almost like a 1 to 1 waiting period for most of these cars.
Yeah.
So what, according to you, would be the right time that one should go ahead and buy?
Well, honestly, this year was kind of slim for most manufacturers. They didn't really see a lot of demand. So as a result, some which had inventories piling up, they are offering crazy discounts, particularly the EV sector where, they didn't see the kind of growth they were expecting. So you're seeing some massive discounts. Yes, of course, it is a question of inventory clearance also. But if the discount is considerable, then I think it's well worth going for. This is a time when, for various reasons, from religious astrological, whatnot, people find this a particularly good time to buy cars. So I don't think there's really much of a factor. Yes, if you buy it towards the end of the year, the manufacturing year is now, it just dates the car. But if you're getting a decent enough discount, keeping that into account, then you should. However, if there is a relatively new model, if there is a facelift that's on the horizon, which is just a few months away, then it makes more sense to wait. People generally get a sense of what that facelift will include. It's largely cosmetic changes, a few infotainment options, etc., thrown in here and there. The waiting period, yes. I mean, some cars which are in extremely high demand, do see extensive waiting periods, and there are people who are willing to sort of wait it out for that. But the good thing is now there are plenty of options, if it goes into like 7 or 8 months, let's say the Mahindra XUV and the Thar had seen some very long waiting periods. There are options, the Innova High Cross particularly has seen very long waiting periods. So some people are willing to, as long as the dealer is able to compensate them for that lost time in case, there's some updates or something, then that should be taken into account.
Right. Well, I think we had quite an interesting conversation that pretty much could tell somebody, at least help somebody out if they were looking to buy a car. Then maybe this could be their starter kit of saying, okay, this is what I have in my checkbox and what next I need to be looking forward to. But thank you so much, Parth Charan, there, helping us understand what really it takes to and the factors one needs to keep in mind before going ahead and buying a new car. Thank you so much for giving us your time, Parth. And also,
Thanks,
just
Stacey.
to summarize for our viewers, while it is an important decision for you to go ahead and take when you're going to buy a new car, do keep in mind all of these factors that we spoke about, right? From getting the budget right, getting the kind of car that will help you transport you from one place to the other, and also how you can finance it differently. Don't just get lured by the discounts, of course, but look into how it will make life easier for you. Don't discount the safety as well as the insurance features. Those are quite critical, that you need to be paying attention to while you're making a choice. So, I can just summarize it by saying, let's get going because the year is ending. So, go ahead, book your test drives perhaps if you want to enter 2025 with a bang. Then here's your chance, and hopefully, we've helped you, make that decision as well. With this, it's a wrap on this edition of the Daily Finance Wrap. Thank you so much for watching.